Welcome back. I don't always do 2 puzzle solving videos in a row, but when I do, I usually do pretty poorly on the second one if I did well on the first one. And yesterday I did really well on that one, so hopefully I won't do too bad on this, but I'm going to do the best that I can. I'm going to try to talk through my thought processes and try to get better at chess. This is our first puzzle. As you can see from my score in the left column, I made it to 1978 in my last session. The opponent has just captured something with the pawn and is threatening my queen and my bishop. There are several ways out of that threat. Obviously, I think I have 3 different pieces that can take that pawn. I also do have a check, which will get my queen out of danger and temporarily protect this piece. If I check, which is the first thing that we look for in puzzles, and I think that's my only check in this position, the king would be forced to move out here to d7, and then I could capture that pawn with my bishop, and it would be check again, but then they could then they could block with their pawn, and then my queen would be in danger from the rook, and my bishop would be in danger from the pawn, but I could take that pawn with my pawn, and it would be check again. This is a long sequence, but it might work. I don't know. If the king moves here and I check with my bishop by capturing on b5, I assume they would block with the pawn, although they could block with their knight. But let's say that they block with the pawn, then I could take with my pawn, which would be check again, and then they could take with their knight. If they took with their knight, I'm not sure. That gets pretty complicated because there's multiple choices each way. This is the most forcing move here, but then they have 2 choices to block my follow-up check with the pawn or the knight. I suppose they could block with the queen, but I don't think they're going to. So yeah, I think they would block with the pawn first. I would take back, would be check. But then they wouldn't have to take back with the knight or the pawn. They could move out of check. But if they did, wait, I think that's it. Check, here, check, block with either the pawn or the knight. In either way, I would take. Then I would have a check here with my queen, because that pawn, the c pawn, would be out of the way, no matter how they took back on with this other pawn. I'm going to try that, just because in a game it might be really tempting to capture this b pawn, or the front to b pawn, with my knight, which would threaten their queen. But then I'm not sure where the queen would go, but it has several options. For example, it could just move here, or it could move here, it could move there for that matter, or even over here. The queen has several places it could go if I captured that pawn and threatened the queen. So I'm going to check first. Okay, that tells me that a bunch of the rest of what I was thinking of was correct as well. The only follow-up check I have here, besides sacrificing my queen for the rook, going down that exchange, is this here, taking the b5 pawn with my bishop. And as we said, they're going to block either with their c pawn or the knight, which I will take with my pawn, I think. And then that will leave this pawn. I mean, this pawn is currently undefended, but without the c pawn in the way, that would be a check as well. Okay, they did block with that pawn. Now I could check here immediately. Should I do that? That's a good question. If I check there immediately, they can block with their queen. But if they blocked with their queen, then I could check with the pawn. And if the king moved out of check, here or here, wow, it gets pretty complicated, because they could block with the queen, or they could move out of check. If they blocked with the queen, then I could check again with either one of these pieces, either my bishop or my pawn capturing on c6, and the queen couldn't take because the queen would be pinned by my queen. And then the king would have to move further away. Oh, wow, that does get really complicated. So should I check first with the pawn, or should I check with the queen first? That's a good question. Let's see, if I check with the pawn, they have 2 ways of taking back. I say this pawn needs to be gone before I do that, because if I take the pawn with my pawn first on c6, they can then take it back with this pawn, with their b pawn. And then that check wouldn't be as effective because the knight could still take. Right now they have 2 defenders, well, 4 defenders on that square. But I can remove the least valuable defender there first, and in which case I'm almost positive that they would block with the queen, because the only other option, they can't move forward because of my pawn. They would have to move back if they moved, in which case then I would take this with check, or with the pawn maybe. No, the pawn wouldn't be check, but the bishop would be. But then they would take with the knight. in a game, I would take with the pawn here, but I don't know if that's right. I just don't know. Because I have 3 possible checks here, and only one of them is going to be the correct answer for the puzzle. I'm going to go with my queen, just because my queen is in danger right now. If I check some other way and the king manages to get out of it, well, it couldn't go that way because of my knight. It managed to get out of it, so like that, for example. Wait, I was going to say if it managed to get out of it, then my queen would be in danger at the end. But I'm going to go back to this. Queen captures on b7, check. If they block with the queen, remember, I have already removed defenders from this square. I've removed the pawn as a defender of c6. And the queen blocking the check would remove another defender from that square, because then the queen would be pinned. So then I could take with the pawn, and the knight, I think the knight would have to take at that point, and then I would take with the bishop, and I think that would be mate. No, because the queen wouldn't be here anymore, so it could move up 1. But then I could fork the queen and the king with my knight. Sorry, it's too complicated for me. I am accepting the fact that I may fail this puzzle with this move here. I did not fail the puzzle, but that's not mate, so I'm curious as to what Stockfish says the opponent should do next. It says their best move is to move back 1. Okay, well, I was wrong about that. If they moved back 1, it says I would actually take this with my knight, which is really interesting. I don't know if I would or not, but if they blocked, that would actually be a blunder on their part. I would take this with my bishop, and then, of course, they would take with their knight. I would take with my pawn. They would have to move either forward or back, and the computer is actually saying forward is their best move. Okay, and then I was correct that I would fork the king and the queen with my knight. Okay, well, I did get it right, but I certainly wasn't sure about it, and that took way too long. Let's go to the next puzzle. Well, I mean, there are several choices here. I'm not sure which one is the best. I do have a check, which would be the rook checking on d8. That would be a fork of the king and the queen. If the opponent... But if I did check there, let's see, what are the choices? The opponent would have multiple choices at that point. They could move out of check, and then I would take their queen. They could block the check with the knight or this rook. If I think in either of those cases, I would take their queen. Or they could take immediately. And if they took immediately, I would have just lost a rook, but then I could take their queen with my queen. And then they could take my queen with their rook, and then I would take their rook with my rook, and we each would have lost a queen and a rook. Now at that point, they would still have the choice of blocking with the knight or moving out of check, or blocking with the rook. If they blocked with the rook, I would just take it for free. If they blocked with the knight or moved out of check, then we would have just had even exchanges. So I'm curious as to what else there might be in this situation. I guess one option would just be to take this rook now. That would be one option, because the only way they can take back there is with this knight. And if they did that, then their knight can't block the check anymore, and neither can the rook. So captures is the second thing we look for after checks. It looked like my checks would just result in even exchanges of a rook and a queen each. But if I take the rook first, and let's assume they'll take back with the knight, then I can check with my queen. No, then they would just take it. And then if I took back, they would take back, and I would have lost all my rooks and queens for just a rook and a queen. So that's not good. There's something else then. Okay, this one's really difficult. And the left column says it's from a blitz game, which means the people playing this who are rated much higher than I am missed this during the blitz game, but it's a 3+0 blitz game, so no increment. This looks like it's on move 18, so for all we know, about half their time is gone already, and they're just in a hurry. And if I can't find it in 5 minutes, then I couldn't expect very many players to find it in a few seconds. Going back to the checks. Okay, so my queen, their queen, this rook, and this rook are all off the board, and my rook on my back rank rook is down here checking the king. If they moved out of check or blocked with the knight, which is, again, what we assumed they would do, one of those two moves, then I guess I could bring this bishop here to threaten the rook, but then it would just, it wouldn't have anywhere to go. The rook wouldn't have anywhere to go at that point, because if it went here, my rook would take it, and if it went there, my bishop would take it. Maybe that's it. Maybe then I would still have a rook down here, and I would get rid of their other rook. And at the most, I would lose a pawn out of the deal. I'm going to try it because it's taken too long. Okay, so far so good. Well, this has to be the next move. Okay, they took. This has to be the next move. And then the bishop is, because that's what we said would happen. They would either block with the knight or move out of check. They chose to move out of check. I don't have anything else here. Wait, I do have a check, but then they just take with that pawn. And then I don't have a follow-up check because I don't have another rook that can come over here, and that's not safe back there. So I don't think that checks it. I think my original idea is still good because their rook can't escape, right? If their rook moves over, I take with my rook. If it moves over too, I take with my bishop. If it goes down, I take with my rook. So I'm getting that rook for free. Wow, I thought for sure I was going to fail that puzzle. Well, I've used up more than half my time on 2 puzzles, and hopefully I will edit most of that out for you viewers. I'm going to try one more. Okay, we are in an endgame puzzle. I'm playing with the white pieces, and our pawns are headed up the board as it lies here, this way. The thing about endgame puzzles, as always, is that there are very limited options from which to choose. I only have 3 pawns. All any of them can do is go 1 square forward. None of them can capture anything or jump 2 squares at this point. So those are 3 options. I have options with my king. Not there because their rook controls that square. I could move my king 5, 6 different ways. And I can move my rook to quite a number of squares. I don't think it's the front pawn. Let's just eliminate these one by one. I don't think it's the front pawn because their king so easily gets there. I guess I could at that point, I could at that point protect that pawn with this rook. If I had played f7, their king had played g7, I wouldn't come over here and check on g2 because then their king would just take my pawn. I could protect the pawn by going down to d7 with my rook, but then I couldn't move it forward, and then my rook and pawn would just be stuck there. So that's why I don't think that's it. This pawn, the rear f pawn to f5, I think makes about the same amount of sense, which is to say not much because their king just gets next to it. No, if their king gets next to it, then I push the front pawn forward. So their king wouldn't move at that point, I don't think. What would they do? What would they do if I played f5? Can I assume they would advance one of their pawns and then I would have to do something about that? My pawn is definitely closer to promotion than any of theirs. This is their closest to promotion pawn, is their C pawn, because that one, their A pawn can't move and their B pawn is 1 rank behind. So their closest pawn to promotion needs 4 turns. 1, 2, 3, and 4 before it can promote. My closest pawn only needs 2 squares. It's just that it can't go right now because they're king. Okay, so let's solve that problem then. Let's try to. I don't think h4 is the answer. I'm going to eliminate that now just because, actually, sorry, I'm jumping back and forth between pawns, but I don't think h4 is the answer because that just allows their king to get next to this pawn, which again, I can only protect by putting the rook there, and then the pawn and the rook are stuck, and my opponent is going to start moving their C pawn. So I don't think it's the H pawn. Now, I had said that maybe f5 wasn't the answer. And I think the reason for that is because it doesn't do anything. After that, that pawn can't go anywhere. Back to this pawn. That's the pawn that I want to move. It's my main advantage right now. The way that I keep the king from getting closer to it is putting my rook over here on g2, because that traps their king on the h file. Now then, I don't know what my opponent might do. They might check me. I think if they checked me, if they checked me on a3, I would move toward their pawns in a diagonal fashion. And if they checked me again, I guess I could continue moving toward their rook. And then if they checked me again, I could get in front of that pawn, maybe. That's what I assume they would do if I moved my rook over to g2. But I want to move my rook to g2 because that protects this pawn by preventing the king from going to any of the squares next to that pawn. I can't think of anything else. Nothing else makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to play g2, and hopefully that's not wrong, but it might be. It was not wrong. And they didn't check me. Okay, I was wrong about that, wrong about guessing their next move. But I was right about what I should do, which was to prevent their king from getting close to my front f pawn. Okay, the fact that they moved here instead of checking me tells me that this is actually a real danger, and the reason that they moved here was that's the only way they could get down there. If they went one further, obviously I would take it with my king. So they're trying to get down in front of this pawn. So that tells me I need to move that pawn. See, if I move that pawn forward to f7, their king can't chase it, but their rook can then get in front of it, and then I would play here. And if they took my rook, then I would promote, and if they came closer with their king, then I would just take their rook. I think that's it. I think it's f7, so I'm going to go. Wow. Okay. Well, it is taking me longer on average per puzzle than it did in the previous video, but I've got 3 in a row. that I'm not the kind of optimistic person that thinks when I'm on a streak, I just can't miss. When I'm on a streak, every time I get another one right, I keep thinking, oh, I'm going to fail the next one then. That's just the kind of, I guess, pessimistic or even, I would say, realistic mindset that I have. Because the more that things go right, the greater the chance is that something's about to go wrong, at least in my experience. Let's go on to the next puzzle. Another endgame puzzle. I have a lot of choices. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go ahead and eliminate a6 as an option here just because they can take it so easily, but they don't even have to take. If I play a6, they could just, I think, push their b pawn past me, and I'm going to have a hard time stopping it, but they probably would take. That would give them stacked a pawns, but then I would have to immediately start rushing over there with my king to stop them. Actually, would I even be able to? Because their knight guards that square, and this pawn guards that square, and the pawn that just captured mine would be guarding that square, so I couldn't even get my king over there, could I? I would move one, and then that front pawn would move forward, and I couldn't get any closer because that pawn's guarding that square, and the knight's guarding that square, and the other pawn's guarding that square, so I'd be stuck. And then they would promote on the next turn. So that's not it. I don't have any checks except for this pawn. That's my only check in this position is e5. Is that any good? What would they do if I checked with e5? Their king could not come forward because my king is guarding those two spots, and their own knight is in the way there, of course. Now, my knight guards those two spots, so they couldn't go there. So checking here on e5 would only give them two options. They would be then attacking my knight, but I would be attacking their knight. Let's see. I check with e5. I'll examine the other pawns in just a moment, but let's check this first. e5 check. I assume they would go toward my knight, which leaves their knight undefended, but my knight's also undefended. Then would I take their knight, and then they would take mine? Because if I take their knight, then that's what they would do, right? But then I would take this pawn, and then what would they do? No, because I would be about to take their next pawn. Because right now my opponent is a pawn ahead, so that little sequence I just outlined would allow me to take out these two pawns, and then I would be a pawn ahead, and it would be this one. And my king would be in front of it already, which is where you want your king when you're trying to advance a lone pawn out there and there's no other pieces to shepherd it down. So that actually looks pretty good. But I could also move the knight. Not there, because they would take it, but maybe there, to d1, which would be a check again. If they went toward it again, then I would pick off this pawn and be threatening that one. Now, it wouldn't be check. I'm positive that this is the first move because none of these pawn moves do anything. I said I would check them each later, but I mean, those are the only choices for these pawns, and I don't think that does anything. This one's the only one that threatens something, but then I think they would just take it, and then I would take back, and we would still be pawn equal on the king side. So that's why I think it has to be this. No king move makes sense. No knight move makes sense right now. So I'm going to play that. All right. And they did do what I thought they would because it didn't make sense for them to run that way. Okay. And now the question is, do I take their knight and let them take mine and then start taking these pawns? Or do I check first? Because if I check first, I'm pretty sure they're going to go there. And then if I take this pawn, what are they going to do? That left this knight undefended. I guess they could go toward mine again, but then I take their knight because they can't get back to defend their knight. Oh, wait. Their knight can check me here and get away. Okay, that's something I didn't consider before, is that their knight can get away. If I check them and they move out of check and I take this pawn, then they can check me, which I don't think they would check me because I could move closer to it, but they could go there, for example, to d3, but then we would trade knights and then we'd only be even on pawns. I think I take their knight and then pick up these pawns also. Okay, well, on my end, I've gone past the time limit. I only got 4 in this video, but they were harder, at least in my opinion, than the ones before. And now, including the previous video, I have 10 in a row, at least, on Lichess. So I'm pretty happy with that. Hopefully, the kinds of things that I talked about helped some of you. And if I talked about them in an incorrect way, or if I missed something obvious when I was guessing on these moves, those of you who are as strong or stronger than me in chess, please feel free to discuss that or inform me in the comments so that I can get better. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.